Hello, welcome to Matter Over Mind. I'm Stephen Mather, I'm a business psychologist. And as always, I've got my favourite future son-in-law, Thomas, with me. Thomas, welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm Thomas, the experimental physicist of the duo. And yeah, we're going to be talking about fusion today.
Cool. Yes, we are. We're going to talk about fusion. Before we start, I just want to mention that I bought a new book, which I'll show you. Obviously, our listeners can't see it because we don't have a visual podcast. We have an audio one. But this is my new book called Physics for You, O-level edition.
That's great.
This is the book that I had when I was at school.
Nice. Well, sort of.
I thought when I first got it, it sort of looked so much like my own book. I thought it might even have my name in it. I was convinced that this was mine, but it doesn't have any name in it. So there you go. But it's
what sort of topics?
Yeah,
what sort of topics they're teaching you in O-level?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really quite good. I remember the teacher saying at the time they'd only just started using this book, and I remember them saying how good it was. They were really impressed with it, and it is actually, looking at it, is. I mean, it's mainly all the there's no quantum physics or anything in there. It's all the kind of classical physics stuff. So you know, momentum and gravity and all of those sorts of, you know, weight and mass and all of that stuff, pumps and
pulleys and such,
so on. But you know, it's got it all in: magnetism, electromagnetics, and all that stuff, jets and rockets. So yeah, I don't know. It got me thinking. Oh, actually, if you're a member, dear listener, if you're a member of the Facebook group, there's an open free Facebook group, Matter Over Mind, that we have quite a few members now, but bafflingly you're not on it, Thomas.
Oh yeah, to be honest, I very rarely use Facebook for anything. Use Facebook, yeah, no. I should probably join just to keep up appearances.
And neither is Celine either. She's not on it either. My daughter, your fiance. So I want you two to pull your finger out and become members of the group, because it's a great little group. I asked for people's suggestions about what we're going to talk about, and they do offer suggestions. So yeah, join the group, and then people can actually talk to you directly about any of the physicsy stuff. So yeah, and if you see that group, then you'll see a little picture with me holding my book excitedly on the day I got it. So you can
Matter Over Mind podcast.
Okay, I've got a joke for you from the book.
I've just joined the group, by the way.
Oh, well done, thank you. There's a little joke here. So Mrs. Messer, the guy, there's like a cartoon character called Professor Messer, who appears throughout the book. A firm favourite. So, Mrs. Messer, what do nuclear scientists have for dinner?
I don't know, Stephen. What do they?
They have fish and chips.
Okay.
Fish and chips.
Yeah.
Do you get it? So that's the kind of standard of jokes. It's like a kind of Christmas cracker joke. But, anyway, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that interlude, everybody, or that introduction. Let's get to it. Let's get to the science. So what we're going to talk about is kind of related to that. I looked up nuclear power and actually nuclear fusion in the book, and there was very little on it, so apart from the joke. But we're going to talk about fusion today, because that is kind of your area of research, isn't it? And so you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, technically speaking, I'm a plasma physicist.
Okay.
But yeah, I specifically research the conduction physics in a specific type of plasma, which heat flows in loads of systems, notably in fusion plasmas. So it's I don't directly work on fusion projects, but my work is applicable.
Cool. Good. Okay. So we're going to learn about nuclear fusion today. There are some topics that our friends on our Facebook group have suggested. We will get to those, but today we're going to cover nuclear fusion. And of course the joke is always that, you know, it's always 20 years away.
Yes.
And I was watching a video by Isaac Arthur. He's quite a well-known scientist and physicist, and he's got a YouTube channel called Nuclear Fusion Updates and Impacts, and he goes into it in quite a bit of detail. But again, he starts with that joke, essentially, that, you know, it's always 20 20 years away, and it sort of seems to be. In fact, in my Physics for You book, the only line in there, it says, we've not been able to control the nuclear fusion yet, so it's not appropriate for power stations. So it was the same then, some sort of 40 years ago.
Yeah,
as it is now.
Yeah, funnily enough, actually, I went to a conference a couple of months back where they were talking about this sort of the next steps to making to conceptualize power plants using fusion. And they didn't say that this 20 years away, but they showed a little flow diagram with several blocks of 5 years. And I was like, oh, right, okay.
There we go.
Not outright said 20 years away, but if you follow the flow diagram, it's still allegedly about 20 years away.
About 20 years away. Yeah. So we want to understand all of that. So maybe first, you might have a bit of a plan, so tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree, but I thought I might like, first of all, to understand a bit more about, obviously I understand that nuclear fusion is fusing together atoms as opposed to fission, which is setting them apart, but how the atoms are constructed in the first place might be useful. So let's understand a little bit about the atom and why breaking it apart or putting it together might actually release energy. So do you want to tell me a bit about that first?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so basically atoms are the sort of a relatively small building block that builds upwards. And within the atom, you've got neutrons and protons, or in the case of larger than hydrogen atoms, rather. You have neutrons, which are just neutral particles of roughly equivalent mass to protons, which have a positive charge. So inside this nucleus, you've got collections of these things. And what's kind of interesting is if you sum up all the masses of all the protons and neutrons that reside within a nucleus, you'll get a mass, or total mass, bigger than the nuclei actually weighs. And this is because, similar to magnets, if you push two south poles or two north poles together, they'll repel each other. Electrical charges do the same thing. So protons have positive charge. When you hold them together, they want to repel each other, which we kind of talked about a little bit on a previous podcast. So when you encase all these protons inside effectively a shell, they're going to want to repel each other. And the electromagnetic repulsion force or attraction force is really strong. So these protons really violently want to get pushed apart. But if you get close enough together, this other force comes in, the strong nuclear force, which is one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature. And that is extremely strong on very small distances, such that it can overcome this repulsion. So there's some sort of internal energy in the atom kind of stopping it flying apart, which is eating up some of the, I guess, what would be the matter. So the sum of all the parts, if you will, is greater than the whole, such that when you break apart the atom, or you split it in half, or smush 2 atoms together, there's now a mass difference. So that mass difference comes into it as energy, basically.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting. So let me just play that back to you to see that I understand it. So that's really interesting. I never realised that. If you had a teeny weeny set of scales, and you were to put a break or the individual bits of an atom, if there's multiple protons in there, you weigh them, and individually they would weigh more than when they come together in the nucleus of an atom. Is that right?
Yeah. So say you had carbon's got 6 protons and 6 neutrons. If you collected 6 neutrons and 6 protons and put them on the scale, it would measure whatever it measures.
X,
But then if you now collect them and they form the atom of carbon, the nuclei of carbon rather, and that weighs less than adding up the mass of 6 times neutron mass plus 6 times proton mass.
Interesting. And that's because there's this energy because we know that energy and mass, basically they're interchangeable, they're the same thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so it's this energy that they're expending that is essentially making them lighter by mass, because they're actually losing some of that mass through the energy that they're having to use.
Yeah, that's a way of thinking about it. Some energy is going into this strong nuclear force, which is binding them all together. Obviously, we have to have an energy balance, as we talked about last time.
Yep.
As a result, you have a nucleus, which is, weighs less mass. So for fission, which is the power that we use now, when we talk about nuclear energy, fission is when you crack apart a heavy nuclei. And in the cracking apart of the nucleus, it emits a bunch of smaller nuclei and then a bunch of energy. And a way to think about it is, as you're breaking it, you're kind of relieving this strong nuclear force of its duty. You'd be on your way, but that energy has to go somewhere. And then similarly, when you fuse atoms, it's basically the same in reverse. You're taking a larger mass, squeezing it into something which is a smaller mass. That mass difference comes out in energy, basically.
Wow. Brilliant. Okay, that sounds good. All right, so tell me about nuclear fusion then. What are we actually doing when we do nuclear fusion? Because there's certain elements that are better than others to do this. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so there's actually a curve, basically a stability curve of atom number, so how big the nucleus is, versus energy out versus energy in, or whatever. So basically, it turns out that all elements that have less protons than iron, metallic iron, Fe,
the element,
all elements, all atoms that have less protons than iron, there's more energy to be gained from fusing them, and then all elements that have more protons than iron gain energy from fissioning them or cracking them apart. And this is basically just because the energy required to either fuse or fission, I guess,
break apart.
You have to put more energy into, for example, breaking apart carbon than you do, say, uranium per mass, basically. So anything lighter than the iron, then you probably want to fuse it. Anything heavier than iron, you probably want to fission it. And iron itself is actually an extremely stable element. For some reason, I'm sure there's a bunch of very complicated theory to explain why iron is the most stable element. But yeah, I mean, most stars at the end of their life, they decay into iron. Just that's sort of on the stability curve. It's just the most stable.
Okay.
So you want to fuse. So fusion, I guess, why fuse over fission? What's the difference? When you cause nuclear fission, most of the elements on that heavier scale that are useful to break apart, when you break them apart, they release sort of, I guess, the resulting atoms that you make when you crack apart a heavier element tend to be radioactive. They tend to emit harmful radiation. So obviously that's a bit of a pain to deal with. Whereas the lighter elements don't really do that. When you fuse them together, there's not really any waste product other than energy. And sometimes you do get neutrons which can contaminate stuff, but not in the same way as if you break apart. Uranium, you get like krypton or something, which isn't great, and you get a bunch of alpha radiation as well. So it's the waste products of fission are many, whereas the waste products of fusion aren't so harmful. So that's why you would choose one over the other.
That's why fusion is seen to be a better option than fission. So I understand that we do understand how to do fusion, in that, like, the hydrogen bomb is essentially nuclear fusion. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So fusion, the actual task of fusing two elements together, isn't really that hard to do. Like, obviously, you probably couldn't do it in your shed, but we've
thankfully,
yeah,
yeah.
Well, at least I couldn't. Maybe somebody out there could. But yeah, as a species, we've known how to fuse things and have been able to do it for quite a while now. The problem is containing it. So obviously, you mentioned the hydrogen bomb, where you set off this breakaway fusion reaction and it explodes. The problem is, obviously, a bomb is easy to make. You just let something explode. But now, suppose I want to contain that energy and then funnel it to something useful, like, powering the grid or whatever. That's a much harder task to do without blowing up your reactor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. That's really interesting. Anything else that you think I need to know? We need to know about the sort of basic theory of what's going on in fusion.
I think that's pretty much it in terms of, like I say, what fusion actually is you're fusing together elements, and you want to fuse rather than crack, because the waste products are less harmful. The fuel also is more abundant, so obviously to have fuel grades heavy elements for fission, like uranium-236 and stuff like that, it's quite hard to find, because it's a very heavy element, and also it decays away. So there's a big mining effort to get that. Whereas in principle, you can fuse with stuff like lithium and obviously hydrogen and stuff, which is very abundant in
hydrogen. Is everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay. So when just a probably silly question, but when you're fusing, are you fusing two atoms of the same element? Sorry, two. What are you actually fusing, if you like? Are you basically fusing two atoms, or are you fusing two nuclei of the same atom or different atoms? What are you actually fusing?
So what
together?
You're fusing is the nucleus. Fusing an atom doesn't really make sense, because an atom is just a nucleus, which is a collection of protons and neutrons surrounded by a bunch of electrons. The electrons don't fuse together. So this is specifically the nuclei of atoms. You fused, and in principle, you could fuse a lithium with a hydrogen or whatever. But so it doesn't have to be the same species or the same element that you're fusing, but it is the nucleus. So fusing the atom doesn't really make sense, because the electrons are independent of this.
So you're fusing the nucleus of the atom, and you're fusing together two protons. Is that right?
No, the protons themselves don't get fused together. It's the atom, or the atomic nuclei, is a collection of protons and neutrons. So you're
and you're fusing them with another set of.
So imagine you've got a ball, or like a bag filled with little marbles, and I have a second bag filled with marbles, and then I'm just pouring one bag into the other bag and squeezing it shut. So now you have So the protons and neutrons aren't becoming one bigger thing. It's the collection of protons and neutrons is now being forced into the roughly same space as the other one.
Got you. Okay. All right, good, thank you. Okay, so what sort of elements are we talking about then? There's I know there's some that are more common than others that we use in fusion experiments. So what are we talking about?
So hydrogen often comes up. It's very light, it's just one proton. And then you have isotopes of that, like deuterium and tritium, which you've probably heard of. So those basically, so an isotope of an atom of an element rather, it always has the same number of protons. So the number of protons dictates what element it is. So a one proton atom is hydrogen, a 2 proton is helium, and so on, and you can follow along the periodic table. But you can tack more neutrons in, and it just becomes what's called an isotope. So hydrogen is just a singular proton. When you add in a neutron into that system, you now have deuterium, and then if you add a second neutron, you have tritium. And the reason why you want to do this is there's this thing called the cross section, which basically is the probability of particles interacting or colliding, and it just happens to be tritium reactions, or tritium hydrogen or tritium deuterium. They just have a large cross section. They have a large probability that they will collide in certain conditions. So that's kind of one of the things you're looking for. You're looking for lighter elements, because it's easier to fuse them together, because if you think the lighter the element, the less protons, so the less electromagnetic repulsion you have, so that the less energetic they have to be to even collide in the first place. And then 2, you're looking for this cross section, so how likely are these two things to collide if you're whizzing them around. So those are the main things to think of. But
okay, great. So before I was going to come on this call, I did a little bit of looking up on the old interweb, and I thought, I wonder what the Star Trek Enterprise runs on. So I looked it up, and apparently it's the impulse. So if you're not Star Trekky, then obviously you don't know what I'm talking about here. But in Star Trek, they have 2 engines, really. They have the warp drive, which is the sexy one that everybody knows about, which is folding space, and there's a lot of jargon and babble around that, because obviously no one knows how to do anything like that. But the impulse drive is a bit more. It's a bit more kind of based on, and it is a fusion drive. Apparently, that is the thing. So I looked that up, and it's fusion. And then on today's episode that I watched, we go through the old episodes of Star Trek. Me and my wife, sad as we are, we're on the Next Generation again now, and old Geordie, the head engineer there, chief engineer, he said something about the deuterium, and so actually Star Trek runs on deuterium, or at least that's the fuel that they're using for the impulse engines, which I thought, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So
cool.
There you go. You didn't know that?
No, now I know,
Mr. Physics guy.
Yeah, that's true. You might as well take my diploma off the wall. You can keep that now.
Yeah, I'll do my own. Right. Okay. Good. So, so deuterium and tritium seems to be the ones that come up when I was listening to this other podcast and so on. So is that kind of what we assume we're going to be using for these reactions?
Yeah, probably. Like most of the big experiments that have yielded good results, it's been probably deuterium and tritium, and it's just because, like I say, when you have these systems, low protons are easier to get close together, and then it just happens to be the likelihood of these things even clashing is quite high when you have deuterium and tritium.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, and so I want to get onto the how we do it now. I know that you're familiar with a couple of different types of nuclear fusion reactor. So do you want to tell us a little bit about these sort of competing models of fusion?
Yeah, so obviously, that's we've talked about what it is, but the hard part actually is how to do it. So there's two main ones that will come up. There's inertial confinement fusion and magnetic confinement fusion, or ICF and MCF. So magnetic confinement fusion, or MCF, it's the most, I guess, the most sci-fi one. If if on telly they have fusion or whatever, they'll normally show it in this form. And this is where you have your tokamak or your big donut, your torus, and you sort of make a donut of plasma rotating around, confined in really strong magnetic fields, and then you rotate it around your donut, and then it heats up, and then you have fusing, and then it releases energy. So that's sort of yeah.
So why is it going to fuse? So I'll put a picture on the Facebook group. There's some really cool photographs on the internet around fusion, because you can actually they put cameras inside, so you can actually see the glow, which is kind of cool. Why should these? Why should you get that reaction inside this torus or this tokamak? Which is a great name, by the way. It's just a brilliant name, isn't it? A tokamak. But why would just putting this element in? Well, we need to talk about plasma as well, don't we? But why would putting it in this form suddenly start to create fusion? I don't really understand why that would happen.
So when you have your donut, there's actually two kinds of magnetic fields, or two orientations of magnetic fields. You don't just have. So I'll sort of take a bit of a step back. So I mentioned a few weeks back that if you have a charge traveling through a wire, it will create, or it will generate a magnetic field traveling sort of around the wire. Similarly, if you do the same thing in reverse, if you produce a magnetic field in a circle, a charge will be accelerated through that circle.
Got you.
So if you have your donut, and you can imagine rings sort of around the donut. So imagine you've got, on the surface of the donut, you've just got rings, and those rings generate the magnetic field. That will then accelerate the particle in a circle, basically. You'll just have a racetrack. And that's not very exciting. Not really a lot's going to happen there. But you have these other fields as well, traveling in kind of spiraling around. And you get these things called banana orbits, which is quite a funny name.
That's more amusing than I expected.
And then because of the different directions of these magnetic fields, it accelerates the particles in a slightly different way, and then they kind of loop around themselves. And I guess at some point in this process, there's going to be collisions because you're going to have...
They start banging into each other.
You're going to have sort of counter streaming at different points. And then you get fusion. So I guess explaining a little bit why magnetic fields, I said magnetic fields accelerate charges. So before we start talking about the things fusing, so you need a plasma first. So to explain what a plasma is, it's the definition of a plasma is a gas that has electric charge. It's an ionized gas. So imagine the air in the room that you're sitting in. Imagine if all the air, the atoms that make up the air, imagine if you strip the electrons away from the nuclei. You're now going to have collections of positive charges, which are the nuclei, and then you're going to have collections of negative charges, which are your electrons, and they're all kind of flowing around each other. So now you have this sort of strange fluid that is susceptible to electromagnetic or electronic fields and magnetic fields. Like I said before, an electrical charge moving can generate a magnetic field. A moving magnetic field can accelerate an electrical charge. So now you have this gas where the electrons have been stripped away from the atoms. So you have this charged gas. So now if I put a strong magnetic field, the gas, or this plasma, as it's called, is going to start flowing. So that's why plasma comes into it.
Right. And that's your field. You are a plasma physicist.
Yes, exactly. If you go onto the Oxford website,
so you play with plasma like it's a toy.
Exactly. I am. It's in the palm of my hand. But yeah. So plasma physics. Another, I guess, field that I'm also part of is high energy density physics, which is, I'm kind of in both. They're both basically the same thing, but yeah.
Okay.
So high energy density physics kind of comes into the second. Right,
method. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Okay, so we're in this tokamak, we're in this donut chamber thing, and we've produced plasma, and we've got these electrical charges that are whizzing these, whizzing the particles around the donut, and we've set up these electrical fields in such a way, magnetic fields rather, in such a way that they're kind of bumping into each other at high speed, high energy, and I guess some of them are going to start to come together, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to create these reactions inside this thing, but you don't know exactly which ones are gonna fuse. You don't know because it's a bit chaotic in there, but it's sort of the mass of all that at some point, some are going to, and that's what you're trying to produce.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
And the magnetic fields are sort of required for two reasons, really. One, to start flowing the plasma, and also to confine it. So obviously, if you remember back to, I don't actually know when you'd learn this. Maybe it's high school or A-levels, or maybe it's undergraduate physics. But basically, pressure and temperature basically have the same. They're very equivalent. So if you increase the temperature of something and fix the volume, the pressure is going to spike. Similarly, if you increase the volume and keep the temperature the same, the pressure is going to drop. So one thing, obviously, as you're zooming them around, you're adding energy to them, to the plasma in your tokamak, and it's increasing its temperature, which means it wants to explode, it wants to expand. So you have these magnetic fields confining it, so hence the name. So you're kind of squeezing the plasma with your magnetic fields, and that's keeping it in this donut shape, whizzing around. And so you want to keep high pressures because this helps keep temperature high. And also you want it flowing to increase cross sections of collisions and so on. So there's a few things at play.
Okay, great. And we can do this successfully. We've got a number of tokamaks throughout the world that are producing energy through this process.
Producing energy is, I'm going to avoid using that specific phraseology, but yes, they are performing fusion. There's been a few very successful experiments fairly recently, actually, where they've managed to sustain fusion for sort of orders of 10 seconds, and so really macroscopic time scales.
Okay.
The tricky part then is which I'll get to in a little bit after I talk about ICF, is
Yep.
once you generate that energy, how do you do anything with it? That's but yeah, that'll come later.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's magnetic confinement fusion. In my opinion, it looks the coolest because it's just a big donut of the sun, basically, if it was a donut shape, which is cool. But yeah, so that's MCF, magnetic confinement fusion.
Okay. Got you. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the other one then?
The other one is inertial confinement fusion. So this is closer actually to my research because it requires big lasers, and that's.
See, I think that's cool as well.
It is quite cool.
I know the tokamak looks cool, but big ass lasers, that's even cooler.
It is, yeah, you are right. I am a fan of big lasers. But yeah, so inertial confinement fusion. How this works is you have, instead of having your fuel in sort of, I guess, a gaseous form that you then accelerate, it's in a capsule. You inject it in a small sphere, which is coated by basically diamond. And then what you do with this is you shoot it with lasers, and that compresses it to a really small space. And as I mentioned before, if you increase the pressure, the temperature is basically increasing as well. So you're squeezing this thing by compressing it with lasers. And then when you get to a certain point, the temperature's high enough and the pressure's high enough that everything basically has to just smush together. It has to fuse because there's nowhere else to go. As a result, you get energy because you're fusing. So there's kind of two schools. There's two schools with this. There's what's called direct drive and indirect drive. So direct drive is exactly as it sounds. You just directly shoot the pellet or your fuel with the lasers, and that compresses it. And then indirect drive is usually you shoot what's called a holrom, which is basically like a golden sort of can or golden cylinder that you put your capsule in. And then by shooting the gold cylinder, that emits a lot of X-rays. And then the pressure from the X-rays crushes the capsule and causes it to fuse. Right, okay. So those are the two.
Okay. Yeah. So on the first one, the direct one, is it a single laser that you're shooting at it, or in my childish brain, you're shooting at the same pellet from opposite directions? Is that what you're doing? What is it? One laser, two lasers, 20 lasers? And is it like on a if I was writing a sci-fi movie, it would be like, it would take a long time for it all to happen. So the lasers would be going for like minutes, building up all the power and the pressure. And somebody would be saying, it's about to go, and somebody would be worried that it's too much. Is it anything like
that? Not quite. That would be cool. The pressure gauges are going off the chart. It's in the red. It's in the red. Yeah. Turn it off. Yeah. No, it's nothing like that. Unfortunately, it's a lot more relaxed.
Okay.
But
or is it just some bloke in a white coat just with a little switch go?
Well, it's probably a bloke wearing trainers in some control room that just presses a button, gets a thumbs up from the PI on the experiment. Yeah, okay. I'm happy with that being profile. Turn it on. No, so it's not one or two lasers. So the two. Well, there's a few ignition facilities, but the main ones that will probably come up if you Google it, they're Omega 60 and NIF, or the National Ignition Facility. So Omega 60 has 60 beams. So,
oh wow!
I was actually here last summer doing an experiment, so it's quite cool to see it. But it's you have this massive chamber, this big spherical chamber with a bunch of input ports where all the lasers get deflected into, and basically, so what you want with this capsule is, now imagine you've got a ball of something. If I push it from two sides, like I push it against the table, it's going to flatten out, right? So all the material is leaving from the sides, but I want it all inside, contained. So you have to shoot it from enough different angles such that the sphere collapses uniformly. Otherwise, it's gonna, like, imagine you've got. Do you remember those little there's like kids' toys that they were like, I don't really know what they were. There's some gel in like a little silicone pouch, and then you had like a mesh around it. You'd squeeze it, and all the blobs would come out the mesh.
Yeah, come out. Yeah.
So that's kind of what.
You've got to stop that happening.
Yeah, exactly. You want to cover all your bases. So Omega 60.
See, you're merciless. You're merciless, really. You don't want it to get away.
I'm greedy. I want it all.
Just know it will not. You're trying to get away from all these lasers, but it cannot. So you're completely. That's kind of.
Yes.
That is cool.
So Omega 60's got 60 beams, and the National Ignition Facility, which is the one that has won all the prestigious awards for fusion, has 178 beams. So it's 178 all focused in on one very small spot. I mean, if you think about it, right, you've got laser in direct drive, you've got, just lasers shooting the pellet, or indirect drive, you've got X-rays and, shattering the thing. But there's just light. The light is so intense, it exerts a pressure enough to crush basically a small ball of diamond. And if you just think about that for a second, imagine light hitting you so powerfully that it can crush you. Which you don't really think about light in that way, but
no.
But yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been brought up with movies and TV shows where they're using lasers as weapons. So we should think about it like that, but we don't sort of think about it as light, do we?
Yeah.
They're just like power weapons of some sort. But yeah, lasers, a beam. Is that so? What is a laser actually? I mean, it's an acronym, isn't it? Actually, what is
it? Is a laser. And you know what?
Light.
Despite doing a PhD in laser physics, I could not tell you what it is.
Right, I'm going to look it up. Let's include this in the podcast.
Yes, let's see.
Okay, laser. Light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation.
Okay, there we go. Basically what happens here is, and how this stimulated emission works is, so you may have heard this analogy if you've ever gone down the quantum rabbit hole of, on a small enough, I guess, time and space and energy scale, on the quantum level, things can't have a spectrum of energies. Like if I wave my arm, I can kind of do it at any speed I want, do it as slowly as I want or as fast as I want. I can choose the finest amount of energy I want to wave my arm. If you zoom down enough and you get to the quantum level, you can't do that anymore. There has to be discrete jumps. So the analogy often given is there are shelves, and these shelves get gradually closer together, and if I put a ball on a shelf, to get it to the next stage of the next energy level, I have to jump it one shelf height. I can't put it halfway up a shelf or in between two shelves because it's not going to stay there. So you have to jump it up one level. So that's obviously a very simplified picture, and that's just using your what's called your principal quantum number picture. Your number of shelves is the number of energies you have. There's a bunch of extra complicated effects like Zeeman splitting and hyperfine structure and all this other stuff, which basically atoms are complicated and they're doing a lot of complicated stuff. So as well as shelves, there's like sub-shelves. So imagine you've got shelf 1, shelf 2. Next to shelf 2, you've got one that's a little bit above it and a little bit below it, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Now, to travel through these shelves, you can't just choose any shelf you want to and go to it. Sometimes you have to go a particular route of up some shelf, then down one, and then maybe up like the half shelf or whatever. There's a specific path you have to take to, determined by the spin and the angular momentum and stuff of the atom. I won't get into that because it can get quite confusing. But basically, there are specific routes that are allowed. There are selection rules, if you will, as it might be called in the literature. And what you do with this stimulated emission is you excite an electron in an atom to one of these shelves. And you knock it into one of these shelves, but you choose a shelf that's hard to come down from. You can't. And you excite it so it jumps to the shelf above it, and then you let it relax. And when it relaxes, it emits a photon of that corresponding wavelength as the height of the shelf.
Okay.
But what actually it wants to do is it wants to relax to the ground state. It wants to go back to the bottom shelf. But you've trapped it in this convoluted maze where it can't actually go all the way down. So it's just in this limbo of dropping down. Oh, okay, I'll get a bit more energy. Or drop down again, but you're stuck in this weird other corner of shelves, and you have to do this weird route to get back, which is statistically unlikely. So you kind of trap it in this kind of region where you keep exciting it, and it keeps wanting to de-excite to the lowest state, but the lowest state is still an energy state because you put it in this weird shelf configuration, and then you keep adding energy to it, and it keeps bobbing up and down these shelves, and that's the stimulated emission. And that's why lasers are a very specific wavelength and a single wavelength of light. So laser light, if it's green, every single photon has the same wavelength and is at the same frequency for that particular laser. So that's quite a useful property.
Right. Okay. What color? Here's a really pathetic question, but I don't know. It came to me. What color lasers are they using in this fusion?
I don't actually know. I don't really.
Does it matter? Probably not.
I don't really think it matters because it's Probably not optical.
Okay.
So it will be, like I said,
a wavelength that we can't see.
I believe so. Yeah. I'm not too sure on that one. There are probes that we use that are optical, but that's more for diagnostics rather than actually.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I don't really know. What I do know is though, before the laser beams converge on the little spot, some of them are, or I say some of them, most of them are about 12 inches in diameter. So imagine you shine a laser light and the beam is about 12 inches in diameter, and then they hit a collection of mirrors and lenses to focus them down, and that's when they hit the small pellet.
Okay, so they don't directly fire at it; they go through these mirrors. Okay, cool. And you've been to see one of these?
Yes, I went to Omega 60 last summer to do.
Where's that?
So that's in Rochester, in upstate New York, in the Laboratory for Laser Energetics, or LLE.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a fun experiment. It wasn't fusion, but we still got to use the big laser, so that's cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so it sounds like we know quite a lot about this. We've got two methods that we're using, and we've been doing it for quite a long time. Particularly the tokamak one's been around since the 50s, as far as I understand it. Why haven't we done it yet? Why are we not using them?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the fact that we've not done it yet is the reason I have a job, which I guess is nice.
Every cloud has a silver
exactly.
lining.
So
okay,
there's a few things really. So confining plasma and keeping it in the very small subset of conditions it needs to be in to fuse is actually quite tricky. So as I mentioned before, plasma is basically a gas that has electrical charge. As a result, unlike air, which it doesn't really do a lot. You could turn a fan on, it'll blow the air around, but it's kind of it doesn't really interact with itself. It doesn't really do a lot because plasma is inherently a charged medium. Electrical charges can interact with themselves, so the plasma can self-interact. So internally, there'll be ions or nuclei interacting with the electrons that make up the bulk of the plasma. So there's kind of two length scales, if you will, that you're looking at when you're looking into the physics. There's the macroscopic length scale, which is your sort of fluid description. You're treating it like a liquid or like a gas, that you can direct with magnetic and electric fields. But then internally, you have these what are called kinetic effects, where you have internal interactions going on that is potentially altering the macroscopic effects of the plasma. So you could think, okay, cool, if I have a magnetic field to confine this plasma and make it like a nice cylinder and do whatever I want with it, great. But what that's not including is the fact that internally there might be oscillations, there might be waves forming, there might be, if you perturb an electron, for example, it's going to drag some other electrons with it. And then you're going to get these waves forming on the inside. And there can be cases where these waves grow and become unstable, or they're called instabilities. And these instabilities can then alter the plasma. So instead of having like a nice, cylinder of plasma with your external magnetic field, internally it's kind of broken itself apart. So it's quite hard to confine it and keep it in this nice, neat way. So that's a very high level picture of one of the things that is quite tricky about it is kind of doesn't really want to be confined. So that's
okay. So I mean, it does sound quite chaotic as a method, doesn't it? So I suppose that's part of the problem, is that it's like you're trying to create the conditions for the nuclei to do their thing, really, rather than, I suppose, the second one you described with the lasers, that feels a bit more precise, doesn't it, somehow? But okay, so that's one of the issues. So we've been trying this. I understand there was a bit of a breakthrough recently. Where was it, the tokamak one, or was it the other one?
This was where the inertial confinement fusion. So this was actually at NIF.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is the lasers one, is it?
Yeah. This is
so this inertial confinement fusion. So there was a bit of a big news story where they claimed to have produced more energy than they put in.
Yes.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned right at the start, one of the things that you want to do when you fuse two elements together, it outputs some energy, and in principle, you can harness that energy. That's one of the benefits, right? So when you have your system, obviously you're shooting lasers at it, and the laser light is compressing the fuel. Now, there could be a case, which is, to be honest, for most of history that we've been doing this, where the laser light more is required, more laser light is required than energy output by the system. So you're shooting the lasers onto the capsule, and it's collapsing and it's fusing some, but it then becomes unconfined and it starts blowing up or whatever. So you've put in a lot of laser energy, and it started to fuse a little bit, but then it's not really output much energy because it's not been contained for long enough. So what you're saying, what is happening there is the energy in exceeds the energy out. So it's basically pointless. You've wasted energy to heat something, and it's not self-sustaining. So what NIF did, which was great, was they managed, now there are some caveats to this, which I'm going to explain in a second, but they managed to reach ignition, which is the term given to when the plasma starts fusing, and it exceeded what's called the Lawson criterion, which is a metric of
that's great. That's a book. That's a name for a novel, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
That's a name for a book.
So basically what they did was they shot this pellet with some lasers, and they compressed it, and it started fusing. And when the lasers were off, it was hot enough that it could sustain itself fusing. It kept fusing for longer than the lasers were on it, basically, such that the energy outputted from this self-fusing system exceeded the laser light put in, which is great. Like I said, there are some caveats, which I'll get to in a second, but the Lawson criterion.
But that's good, though.
Yeah, no, it's great. It was a pretty amazing breakthrough, really, because for a while everyone was a little bit panicked because NIF has cost a lot of money. Just for context, this facility costs about $1 million a day to run. It's extremely expensive. Similarly, the experiment I went on, we're there for 1 day, and that's about $500,000. So it's very expensive to run these experiments. But so the Lawson criterion, I've got the Wikipedia page here just for the definition. So it's a figure of merit used in nuclear fusion research. It compares the rate of energy being generated by fusion within the fusion fuel to the rate of energy losses to the environment. So what this means is, obviously, if you heat something up, it's gonna sort of shoot out infrared radiation. It's going to be hot. It's going to be cooling down. But what this is saying is, when it's fusing, this isn't like a fire that's burning. It's fusing, generating energy. It releases what are called alpha particles. These alpha particles come along, and then they basically allow more, they start fusing again. These alpha particles are helium nuclei. And it's called alpha particle self-heating. So if you compress your capsule, you start fusing your fuel, you start throwing out alpha particles. These alpha particles now fuse with the surrounding material, and you're losing energy by cooling down, sure, but because you're emitting more energy, that's causing other things surrounding it to fuse. So you're kind of in this feedback loop. So that's the Lawson criterion. It met ignition, which is great, and it's exceeded the Lawson criterion, which is great. Very big breakthrough for fusion.
So what are the caveats then? You said there's some caveats.
Yes. So
around it,
I was very specific with my wording when I said the energy outputted exceeded the energy of the laser light. I wasn't talking about the facility and the capacitor banks and all the other energy to power the lasers. So obviously that's one of the main things when it comes now to power plants is you've got the raw materials, the stuff you're putting into the system to cause it to do something, but you've also now got the cost of running the facility around it. If you had a coal plant, that if it cost more money to run the plant than it was making by burning the coal, you wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
So in turning on these lasers, you've got loads of equipment and loads of kit and loads of expertise and loads of scientists and engineers and stuff around making this thing happen. So if you take all that energy required to just basically get the lasers going, that obviously massively exceeds anything that was output by this reaction. So what they specifically mean here is, imagine you have a closed system, there's nothing outside, laser light comes in from somewhere. If you add up all the energy from that, specifically just the laser light, and then subtract that from the energy output from the fusion reaction, that's where the benefit is. Obviously, the lasers cost a lot of energy to power, so the reaction itself didn't do anything special. The special part was as effectively as a proof of concept, which is basically what NIF is built for.
Which is where you've got to start with, isn't it? Okay. But that's fair enough. I think that's once you've proven the concept, then you can start reducing all the input wastes, I suppose you'd call them. I mean, it's the principle of any sort of effort. If you're building a factory, making things, at some point you have a break-even point, and then you start making money, but that can take years before you do that. So that's it's the same principle. Okay, got it.
So just another quick note on this. So and this isn't like, they did it once, one and done, happy days, go home. They've since achieving that breakthrough, a few of the shots afterwards yielded poor results. They didn't ignite, and everyone was thinking, oh bugger, have we jumped the gun? They did it once, but then there's some fine tuning that they realized, oh, actually we have to consider this thing. And then since then, basically every time that they're hitting these goals, they can reproduce this consistently. So it's a big deal, but also it's reproducible. So good job. Okay. Good job to them.
Congratulations. All right, so where are they going next with this then? What's the future? The immediate future there.
So the immediate future is now there's actually still a lot of physics that needs pinning down. Like I said before, hence why I have a job. So there's a lot of physics going on that needs still working out. But in terms of, I guess, bigger scale, one of the main things is obviously NIF and Omega 60 and Orion and all these other big facilities. They're very inefficient, and they were kind of not built to be efficient. One of the main things, to have a viable power plant, you need basically constant production of energy. You can't turn it off. And NIF, as great as it is for producing these ignitions, it can only be fired once a day. So that's obviously a big caveat. And Omega, for example, Omega 60, you can shoot it once every, I think it's 48 minutes or something like that, because the lasers have to cool down, the optics have to calm down a little bit, obviously. Everything needs to cool down and recalibrate before they can fire it again. To how, some people have done some sort of quick calculations, and to work out how much, to be a viable power plant, you'd need to be able to shoot at least a shot at a second, a rep rate of a hertz, or maybe even 10 hertz. So basically every second you have to be firing off this laser. At the moment, obviously, it's once every 24 hours. So that's straight away just not viable.
Big difference.
Also, the fusion capsules themselves are extremely expensive to make. Like, I'm talking like tens of thousands of dollars for one. And also they're very hard to make, so they're very small little pellets, and they're sort of coated in diamond, or, a CH compound, a carbon hydrogen compound. And then you've got a layer of ice, basically, deuterium ice. And then you've got another shell, and then inside you've got your gas, basically. You've got to inject it with your fuel. So they're very delicate and very hard to make. So they're hard to make, they're very expensive, and the lasers don't shoot anywhere near fast enough.
How big are they? Are they sort of, they're visible, I take
yes, it? They are macroscopic. They're hold on, there's one, I've got a paper open here, and I think they have the dimensions. So let's have a look. Okay, so the capsule itself would be about 3.5 millimeters in diameter. So
okay, still very small.
Very small. Obviously, that's another thing as well. Fuel density. Nuclear fission, what we have now, is very fuel dense. If you think one atom weighs 236 times more than a hydrogen atom, right? which is wicked. So you don't need a large volume of it to have a lot of energy density. Hydrogen is very light, so you need a lot of it. So the capsules in reality probably would be quite a bit bigger than they are for these experiments.
Okay.
But yeah, just for as they are now, they're about 3.5 millimeters in diameter.
And obviously the cost of making those, the energy that it takes to make those has to go into your final calculation. About the usefulness of it.
But what is amazing is, so I actually work with some of these people, so I guess a shout out to the Central Laser Facility in the UK, CLF, and they're working at the moment on 3D printing these things.
Wow.
To be honest, some of the stuff they've 3D print, I do not understand how they can get it that fine. But that's one of the big things they're working on at the moment, is 3D printing these things, obviously, because that's both going to speed up production, but also make it a lot cheaper. But so that's great. So there's a lot of work going into basically streamlining the production of these things, which all need to happen before the grander scale power plant happen.
Okay. And I take it, while this seems to be the front runner now because of the sort of most recent work, I guess the tokamak people are not packing up their tokamaks anytime soon. They're still working away to see if they can get the same sort of results, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not as familiar with magnetic confinement as I am with inertial confinement. Like tokamak physics or just stellarator physics as well. It's quite different actually to this stuff. But it seems like they kind of have different goals. So it seems like by looking at the sort of headlines and stuff, the tokamak crowd seem to be more, at the moment at least, focused on sustaining plasma for a long period of time. I guess, like I said before, you need your power plant turned on all the time, right? So they're trying to just keep the plasma burning, keep the plasma confined for longer and longer periods. Whereas the ICF gang, what they're trying to do is basically just more yield. We want more neutrons, more temperatures, bigger bangs, more, so they're kind of aiming for different things, even if the end result is the same.
Cool. Okay, so how far are we off having a viable process then, would you say, Thomas?
About 20 years, I'd say. It's hard to say because all jokes aside, it's because there's the physics of getting the fusion fusing, right? There's the breaking even, breaking Lawson criterion, etc. But then there's power plant engineering, which is just a whole different thing, which most of our power plants now, they're not really any different to water mills back in the day. You heat up some stuff, it boils some water, the steam turns a turbine, and then you use that for energy.
We've talked about this together, haven't we, before? Nuclear fission. When I first learned about it at school, I honestly couldn't believe that it's basically driving water mills. It's basically just driving turbines through boiling water, so that the steam drives the turbine. And I thought you must be joking. Surely it's got to be something much more sci-fi than that. But basically that's all that's happening. It's that they get very hot and they boil water really fast. It's like, oh wow.
Yeah. So it's it's a little bit like, obviously that's. There is a lot more to think about, but generally that's pretty much what's happening. You're just boiling water.
Yeah.
Now there are some other fun techniques that people have thought up, and there's no end of fusion startups that have a great idea on how actually they're going to do it and how it's different and so on. So like there are other ideas out there, and some of them, to be fair, sound very sensible. Some I'm quite dubious of, but others I can see the logic behind why they think it may work. But most of the issues of all these other ones come onto are the same issues that all the big players come onto. Is we just need a bigger laser, we need a bigger machine, more power, more energy, and then we'll solve it. So the whole field is plagued by the same issues. Basically, we just need more, and then we can do it better.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I've found that very interesting. Thank you, Thomas. I hope as listeners you thought the same. I think that was really fascinating. I learned some new stuff, although we've talked about it multiple times before. I've learned some new stuff today. So thank you very much for that, Thomas.
No problem.
Excellent. Okay, so if you're a listener, well, how could you not be? Because you're listening right now. So as listeners, please don't forget to tell other people about the podcast. It's still very, very small. It's very early days, so we need your help to let other people know about it. I feels like we're getting better at it somehow. I feel like, we're sort of getting better at the questions to ask and the topics. So hopefully it'll continue to do that. Subscribe or follow on whatever app you're using. We're on the YouTube as well, but just audio. But you can listen to us on that as well. So please continue to do so. Don't forget to join the Facebook group. It's free and it's open. So unless you behave badly, you're allowed to stay, whether you listen to the podcast or not. So please join us there. Great stuff. And you're on your travels. You're doing some exciting traveling.
Yes.
By the time our listeners hear this, you'll be back home. Yeah. But what are you doing?
So I'm going to a conference to present some work I've been doing to design one of these big laser experiments. And I'm going actually to NIF, the National Ignition Facility, in the States in Livermore. So I'm going over the sea to California.
Wow.
To present my research to some other laser enthusiasts.
Laser dudes.
Yeah.
And dudesses. All right. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much, Thomas. Really enjoyed talking to you about that. See you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.